my fellow citizens, at this hour, American and coalition forces are in the early stages of military operations to disarm Iraq, to free its people, and to defend the world from grave danger.
It was the most intensive bombing campaign against Baghdad yet. From where I was standing on the balcony of the hotel where I'm staying, I could see building after building, one after another. I could see the bombs striking them, the missiles falling from the sky and reducing them to rubble. There were fires burning, the plumes of smoke rising hundreds of feet into the air.
Leave the area, you're subject to arrest. This has been determined to be an unlawful assembly. Anyone not leaving the area is subject to arrest.
By 2:30 that afternoon, 42 people remained sitting at the Crossroads. They were politely arrested, but the charges carried a possible 6-month jail term. Some pled no contest in exchange for community service or minimal jail time, but 17 pled not guilty and proceeded to trial. The prosecutor asserted that these defendants threatened society with anarchy if not found guilty. Although lightly sentenced, the Nevada City judges found all but one of the defendants guilty on a variety of charges. Some paid fines, while others chose jail. Many people from the community completely understood why these upstanding citizens sat down in the Crossroads. Some did not, and others were even angered.
Chicken shit!
This series focuses on the individual defense and aims to provide better understanding for this peaceful yet, to some, intolerable resistance.
Do you solemnly state that the evidence you should give in this matter should be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I so affirm.
Please be seated.
Good afternoon, Mr. Jorgensen. Mr. Jorgensen, on March the 20th of this year, were you aware that our country had invaded Iraq?
Yes, that was a report.
Prior to that date, had you participated in any demonstrations in a potential war?
Yes, numerous.
Where? What had you done in regards to this?
Well, it goes back many years, but in terms of this war, right back in the Gulf War and the preceding year or two when there was building up, I was in protests of various kinds.
But in regards to this action that began
Yes.
on March the 19th, I believe, had you attempted to let our government know that you opposed this war?
Yes, in various ways.
What have you done?
Letter writing, phone calls, and the various things that we've done all our lives, trying to write to our letters to the editor, and so on, and phone and write to Congress people. In this particular case, I was a party with one other man in bringing together about 21 organizational people, people who represented organizations, could represent organizations, and we wanted to see each of the senators. The senators had their military aides finally meet with us in San Francisco in a combined meeting, and it was to last a half hour, and it ran better than 2 hours. And the one of the aides didn't let us go. The other one was ready to leave, but we stuck it out, and we sent a list of everything we had talked about and what our wishes were to both senators, individually varied a little. And and especially according to their subcommittee functions. We had personal responses, I presume they're personal, which ran into pages from each of them after due course.
And on that day, was it your intent to petition your government to address this issue?
Exactly. Yes, thank you.
And as you sat there on March the 20th, did you have any intention regarding blocking traffic?
Not blocking traffic. It was to me a symbolic expression, and I recognize that there may be arrest coming out of it. But my intention was to observe the law and not to, it wasn't civil disobedience, but civil obedience. Thinking all the time, and I'm preoccupied with this question, that we have treaty law, which is part of the supreme law of the United States.
Objection. Sustained.
Now, Mr. Jorgensen, you sat on one of those buckets, is that correct?
Yes, I did. In fact, I collected most of the buckets.
And were these buckets holding up a sign?
No, they were helped. The refrigerator box would have blown over, been pushed over easily, except flaps were attached to the bottom, and our buckets sat on the flaps, so it was secure.
Well, did your bodies provide any type of support for this sign?
No, our weight, you couldn't lean against it. But the other thing it did was to confine us so that we occupied less space. That was one of the purposes as well.
Your intent was to occupy a smaller area as possible.
Right.
Is that so as not to block traffic?
It was recognizing that we might be an inconvenience. I don't recall that we thought we were going to block the traffic, but that we might inconvenience some drivers. We didn't. We were worried about public safety. We were more worried about being understood of why we were there.
Do you recall any of your fellow demonstrators, the ones that were seated in on the buckets, being boisterous or violent?
No, not at all. I don't think it was in their minds either.
Would you say that this was a serious moment for you?
This is a profoundly serious moment, and I realized that it had the potential of finally being heard.
Now, Mr. Jorgensen, were you part of the affinity group?
Yes.
Is that the group that got arrested?
Yeah, I wanted it to be called Nuremberg Affinity Group.
Objection, Your Honor.
Sorry. Okay. Yes, I tend to.
The answer is non-responsive.
Yes.
It's struck. Go ahead and ask
Yes,
your next
thank you.
question.
I'll go to my notes when I tend to ramble. Thank you.
Now, there was another group called the Nevada County Peace Center. Is that correct?
The Peace Center of Nevada County.
These are two separate groups. Is that correct?
Yes, we overlap quite a bit, but we took pains to keep the separation.
Now, was the Nevada County Peace Group, or Peace Group of Nevada County, was that the main organizing group of the march?
I believe so, yes.
Did you, as you sat there, did you attempt to keep a low profile?
Myself?
Yes.
Well, I was wearing the sign, and then it got uncomfortable, so I propped it up in front so it could be more readily photographed either direction, and so my back wouldn't hurt.
I see you have a sign next to you. Is that what you have?
Yes, and if I may?
Yes.
I wore it the length of the march. It didn't create as much attention as I had hoped for. And there's two messages.
And does it read, individuals have international duties which transcend the national obligations of obedience, Therefore, individual citizens have the duty to violate domestic laws to prevent crimes against peace and humanity from occurring.
Yes.
And is there another sign on the other side?
Yes, there is. It explains the authority that other quotation comes from.
And does that say, we obey the worldwide obligations of all citizens to uphold the principles of the Nuremberg Charter unanimously adopted by the UN General Assembly?
Correct.
What was your intent, Mr. Jorgensen, as you sat there at Pine and Broad Street?
Well, to fulfill the obligation that has just been read.
Any intent to be violent or boisterous?
I was born with anger. I've switched to outrage when I feel that way. But I've had 60 years with a companion who has helped me to discipline my anger. And I realized I was only failing myself if I yielded to it. So outwardly, if I look impatient, that's a feeling of anger.
Mr. Jorgensen, are you politically active?
Very.
What is your activity, political activity?
May I refer to my notes for brevity?
Well, I would think notes would be brevity, but
Okay.
I think they
Let
that'll
me
help you.
give me a try and let's see if that'll do it.
Okay.
My wife Mary and I have been politically active for 60 years, expressing our convictions by letters, petitions, leafleting, phone calls, personal visits, group visits, vigils, picketing, and protests, and support of national and state peace and justice organizations. I was fortunate to be employed by two such organizations, the American Friends Service Committee and briefly as president of Pacifica Foundation. I also served on the Pacifica board in its early years and other long stretches on the Sonoma County boards of the ACLU and the Peace and Justice Center there.
And in your political activity, Mr. Jorgensen, have you done civil disobedience?
Yes, and civil obedience.
And what is that, sir?
Civil disobedience is opposing laws and trying to change them. Civil obedience is supporting laws and trying to see that they are followed by the political unit so responsible.
And Mr. Jorgensen, you have been arrested, haven't you, for your civil disobedience?
Yes.
And is it true that you were arrested with the Freedom Riders?
That was
Objection, Your Honor, that is irrelevant. Freedom Riders were decades ago.
Let's see, if you're not going to spend too much time on it, I'll allow it. But
Briefly, Your Honor.
Yes, I think it's an important question because how does this get started that you offend? And Mary and I were called by Martin Luther King through a close friend of ours who was his teacher and asked this party, our friend, who was very close to
Objection,
King.
Your Honor, that's going for narrative.
No, it's rated, I'm sorry, sir.
no, just a moment, it is non-responsive. So
Okay, may I read?
wait till he asks another
Okay,
question.
very good, thank you.
And you have done other civil disobedience, is that correct, Mr. Jorgensen?
Yes, over,
What is that?
over 50 times.
Over 50. Why did you go to Pine Street and occupy that center of that street?
Well, my outrage and despair with our government that First Amendment rights seem to have unfortunate limitations, and so you try to speak louder with your body and your conduct. And it's sad that we have to do things like that, but I'm willing.
Did you feel that you had constitutional support for what you did?
Yes, the
Objection,
Constitution.
Your Honor, that's called for legal conclusion.
Yeah, he answered yes. There's no question
Yes,
right now.
yes.
And what is that support?
Objection, that calls for legal conclusion of the
Sustained.
Mhm.
Sustained.
Have you studied And are you familiar with the Nuremberg principles?
Yes, I became...
Objection, Your Honor.
He's answered. Next question.
Yes.
When you went to Broad and Pine Street, did you have these principles in mind?
Yes.
And what principles did you have in mind?
Objection, I believe we have discussed this, but we're not getting into Nuremberg and all the extraneous elements.
Objection.
Your Honor, that was not, as I understand it, a ruling
Ms.
that this
Kaufman,
court made
objection is
previously.
sustained. Let's move on.
How do these principles affect you, the Nuremberg principles affect you on March the 20th?
Same objection, Your Honor. It's just going around by the back door.
Sustained, counsel.
Your Honor, it's a different question.
Well, it only has relevancy if the Nuremberg Charter was relevant to these proceedings. We all understand that their principles guide international relationships. We're just dealing with California law right here. We're not dealing with the ability of this court to examine the executive and legislative acts of the federal government. Those acts are presumed to have been performed regularly. We're not going to examine that here. The parties involved in that are not involved in this proceeding.
Your Honor, the question is how it affected his state of mind, not what these principles were.
Well,
Your Honor, respectfully.
the objection is sustained. Let's move on.
I have nothing further.
Thank you, counsel. Who wants to go next? Ms. Kaufman? Do you have any questions of this witness?
Yes. Mr. Jorgensen, you indicated that, I believe you stated that sitting in the middle of the street, sitting down there, had the potential for finally being heard. You felt you had the potential for finally being heard. What did you mean by that?
I've been trying for 60 years.
And why would sitting in the middle of Pine and Broad give you that potential for finally being heard?
Because it's another situation where I can be in a courtroom.
You mentioned briefly the Freedom Riders. Now, I don't want you to go into great detail, but can you in one sentence say what that group was?
Objection, Your Honor, that's
Well,
irrelevant here.
we're going to go for how a person, through their own conduct, can change government action.
Just a moment.
It's
Just a moment.
crucial.
Just a moment. Listen, all of us familiar with American history know who the Freedom Riders were, and know that what they accomplished in terms of a change in public policy is profound in the society. I don't know why it's relevant in these proceedings, though.
Because these people who were sitting down in the center of Broad and Pine truly believed, and we have an expert to bolster that belief, that conduct would have effect on their government and change what was going on. And Mr. Jorgensen has a history of doing this sort of action and affecting that sort of change.
Ms. Kaufman, without getting into why things changed, and they did change, they were long overdue. Started with the Civil War, started even before the Civil War. That's a long, detailed history. It simply is not relevant in these proceedings. Okay?
Is relevant to his state of mind and his purpose for going there that day, and a purpose not to violate the law.
I'm not interested. I'm interested in his outward conduct, not in what he felt internally. That's not what's going to determine innocence or guilt here. It's what he did, not what he thought. Okay?
Well, we have a specific intent.
Ms.
crime
Kaufman, I've
involved here.
ruled on the objection. The objection is sustained. Move on.
Mr. Jorgensen, part of what you do is an attempt to change legislation within California. Is that not true? An organization that you belong to?
Yes.
And in fact, there is an organization, a lobbyist organization that you helped to found. Is that not correct?
Yeah, I was
Objection, Your Honor,
the
that's-
principal founder.
Objection.
Just a moment.
I fail to see how his organization, so what he's found, has the relevance here. Again, we're trying to limit ourselves to the conduct here, not everything else he's done in the past, which I'm sure is very, very much to be respected. But we're talking about this day and this event in particular.
I'm going to allow a little of this, but remember, what you're talking about is exactly what he should be doing.
And-
Forming lobbyist organizations and advocating changes in the law. That's how things work in our society. They can also work and be motivated by people who are willing to make sacrifices in the street. We all understand that. But that sacrifice in the street, to the extent it violates the law, is not a defense. You have other avenues of redress.
Only if their purpose was to go there to violate the law.
Well,
If their purpose is to change policy, and they have tried other means, and they know that this mean may be successful, then that is the purpose, that's the intent.
Ms. Kaufman, I will give you the benefit of being an experienced attorney and ignore your last statement. His purpose will be interpreted from what happened, not what he sits here today and tells me. Yeah, so if that's the case, why are we going to get into his lobbying efforts? That just merely represents an additional form of redress, the appropriate one, I might add. So, listen, I'm going to allow some of this, but you're way afield here, okay? So
I
go
will
on. Go
move on and pass to someone else.
Mr. Walker?
Mr. Jorgensen, you talked about civil disobedience and civil obedience, and you defined civil obedience. Would you define civil disobedience for me as you understand it?
Civil disobedience?
Yeah.
Yes. Civil disobedience is undertaken to change laws.
The Freedom Riders were breaking the law. Did you know when you were a Freedom Rider that you were getting on that bus to break a law?
Getting on an airplane.
Objection, Your Honor.
Sustained.
Okay. Was your intention on this day, March 20th, to break a law?
No.
Was your intention to exercise your right to peacefully assemble?
Hardly.
You testified earlier that you felt that you might be causing some inconvenience to people.
Right.
Was your intention to shut down the town?
No.
Was your intention to prevent people from walking on the sidewalks?
No.
Was your intention to prevent cars from going around you?
No.
Was one reason you chose?
Objecting whether it's appropriate or not, because my understanding of what our agreement was in chambers is very different from what's happening.
Well, that's
So-
unfortunate, but you can go ahead and ask any questions you want.
Yeah.
Mr. Jorgensen, is it your understanding that your deeply held political beliefs influenced you on that day and were central to your motivation?
Absolutely.
And do you feel that's relevant to your testimony here today?
Objection, Your Honor. That's calling for a legal conclusion.
You can just answer yes or no.
Repeat the question, please.
Do you feel those motivations and the explanation of them are central to your testimony here today?
Yes. Yes.
At the meetings prior to this civil obedience, as you were insistent on calling it, of the meetings of the Central Core Group, did you repeatedly refer to principles of international law in Nuremberg?
Objection, that's irrelevant.
Just yes or no. Yes or no.
Yes.
And can you share with us what those principles
Objection.
were?
Yeah, I will sustain that objection.
I would very much like to ask the sidebar. His belief of the law that he is required to follow is relevant. He has studied this law. It is not something that he, looked up yesterday and came to this conclusion. And I think that is relevant, especially if we can argue a mistake of law.
Perhaps we should go break, Ms. Kaufman, so you can go research the law. Listen, before we digress any further than we are, he can explain what he was thinking that day, and we've permitted him to do that. But to go back and lay a foundation for what he's done his entire life is subject to 352. Any probative value is minimal. It's it's going to take up time that's unnecessary. We're talking about the day in question, the events in question. I don't mind going into that so we can explain his conduct. Mr. Walker and Mr. Belafonte have done a very good job at that. To the extent you want to go back and explain his personal views on Nuremberg and the UN Charter, those things just don't help us at all. All right?
All right, I guess what I'm trying to get to is that in all these meetings with Mr. Jorgensen, that was so central to what he was thinking that I have to ask then, what were you thinking on that day?
I understand what he was thinking that day. Listen, as I've told you people before, I have no doubt at all of you are here because of your good faith, well-founded beliefs in the principles that you stand for.
Did you?
There's no question about that. I don't have any question about that. I don't know about the district attorney, and I really don't care about the district attorney. But I know that.
Did I just hear you say that he would be allowed to express what he was thinking on that day?
Well, yes, you did. You did. And I understand he feels the way he did because of how he feels about the Nuremberg Charter and the UN Charter. Okay, I understand that. Why go any further? Isn't it redundant at that point?
May I ask, why did you think you were not breaking the law on that day? May I ask that?
Well, I think he's already explained it, but yes, he can go ahead and answer. You want to answer?
Yeah. No, I feel muzzled. I can't do it. I can't do it without being challenged. I respect the being challenged, but I thought you really want to know why I do things like this particular one. Freedom rights relate because I got courage.
Objection, Your Honor. We're not going to another 352.
I got courage and satisfaction.
Objection, move to strike. Not responsive.
Sustain.
Which changed society.
Okay. Next question.
Did you answer why? Did you answer why you did not feel you were breaking the law on that day?
Asked and answered, Your Honor.
Well, enough of this questionnaire. You want to explain to this Webb why you feel that way?
It's a catch-22. I'm supporting the federal law, and if I don't, I'm breaking it. And I chose to support the federal law and have this confusion about what I was doing about domestic law. And there, Nuremberg is clear. You're expected to, as necessary.
Your Honor.
Okay, I think he's through with his answer.
I don't think he had completed it.
Well, he said Nuremberg was clear. In his mind, Nuremberg is clear. What else do we need to know? Next question, please.
Did you hear me address the oncoming crowd that they were welcome to follow the bagpiper back to Pioneer Park and not to obstruct the street?
No, I knew you were addressing. I couldn't understand.
Did you hear me address the core group that I was inviting them to come with me, not to be arrested, so that we could go to this action the following day in Sacramento?
A bit of it. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. No further questions.
Mm-hmm.
Where are we? Mr. Pong now?
Yes, Your Honor.
Go ahead.
Mr. Jorgensen, your testimony was that there's no dispute that you were part of that group sitting in the middle of the intersection. Is that correct?
That's correct, sir.
And then your motivation there was to advocate and express your personal views. Is that correct? To express your personal views of the war and what you felt was appropriate. Right?
I've already said why.
Okay. I'm just saying that was why, right? Now, you testified also that you have done many other civil disobedience and ways of lobbying, such as writing letters and contacting a congressman. That is true, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, your testimony again is that you had no intentions of blocking traffic or interfering with people driving through that street.
Correct.
So wouldn't you have to agree that there are ways of going around your, expressing your views without inconveniencing other drivers?
Objection argumentative.
It's also irrelevant, Your Honor. That's not what the law requires.
Go ahead and ask. Go ahead and answer.
Could you reframe your question?
So, knowing that you are sitting in the middle of the roadway and your experience and your testimony saying that you've done all this other lobbying, contacting congressmen and things like that, you would have to agree that there are other ways of expressing your political views rather than in the middle of the street. Wouldn't you agree? There are other ways of doing it.
Yes, there are other ways, yes,
Okay.
that fail.
Now, what we're saying here, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, is that you chose to be in the middle of the street to make a bigger impact than just marching along with a whole group of people. Is that right?
You said I should explain. Oh,
No. Let me rephrase that, Mr. Jorgensen.
please do.
The fact that you chose to sit in the middle of the intersection with this smaller group of people for 2.5 hours, that was your choice to make a bigger impact to express yourself. Isn't that right?
Yes.
And you also testified that your motivation is to get another chance to be in the courtroom,
Right.
to express your views on
Yes.
the courtroom. Nothing
Yes.
further, Your Honor.
Okay. You can step down.
Your Honor, may I have, just very briefly.
Briefly.
Mr. Jorgensen, was your intent there at Pine and Broad to petition your government to listen to your objections to what was happening?
Yes, here.
Thank you.
It's pretty limited recross. Mr. Quam?
One question, Your Honor. By choosing your actions on March 23rd, 20th, I'm sorry, on choosing your actions on March 20th, and of course with your experience in civil disobedience, you do know that you were liable for some criminal action, right?
Oh, yes.
And you chose that voluntarily, is that correct?
Oh, yes.
So you know that you can expect the consequences of that action, right?
Oh, yes.
Thank you. Nothing further.
Okay, Mr. Jorgensen, you can step down. Thank you very much.
Ms. McNair, you're familiar with the events that led up to your arrest on March 20th, correct? And you've been present during all the testimony here today, so you recall the events of this day, is that right?
Yes, I do.
Ms. McNair, were you or are you part of a group that we've been referring to today as the Affinity Group?
Yes.
And did you have the occasion on March 20th to take part in a march down the main streets of Nevada City?
I did.
And was that march arranged by the Affinity Group or someone else?
The march itself?
Uh-huh.
It was arranged by the Peace Center.
How did the Affinity Group fit into the march? Did the Affinity Group plan on doing something different than the marchers?
Yes.
And what was that to the best of your understanding?
We planned to sit down in the middle of the street.
And did you discuss whether or not you were going to be blocking traffic that day?
Well, we didn't really discuss that as much as we discussed the intersection symbology.
What was that?
That we are at a crossroads in our society today that has to do with we've never had an active strike, and that our government has decided to go into an area that we have never been in before, so we felt that that was a major crossroad. So we mostly talked about the symbology, not necessarily the, sitting down in the street or these crazy as that seems.
Well, did you consider that you might get squished by a car while you were?
Well, that was part of why we had a box there, so we would be very visible, and why we decided to consolidate ourselves so much. We wanted to be really close to each other, close enough to be able to touch each other.
Now, when you were sitting there, actually, which side of the box were you sitting on? Were you looking up Broad Street, down Broad Street, Palm?
I was looking towards
the courthouse?
Toward the place, yeah, up towards that street there.
Friar Tuck's?
Yes.
Okay. Did you see, as after you sat down, did you see a time during which many more people were coming?
In the street, you mean?
Uh-huh.
Yes.
And in fact, did hundreds of people gather from your observation point?
Yes.
Did you ever encourage any of those folks to stick around?
No.
Did you ever ask them to consider joining you in sitting down in the middle of the intersection?
No.
In fact, did you hear other people encouraging the crowd to move along?
Yes.
Did you hear Eleanor, for instance?
I didn't hear Eleanor, but I did hear other people.
How about Lorraine? Did you hear Lorraine?
I did hear Lorraine.
Did you hear Chief Travato at some point discuss with some portion of you guys whether or not you should move on or consider moving on?
Yes.
And did he have that conversation at any time with you directly?
No, not specifically with me.
Okay. Did he tell you why he felt suddenly that the sitting had become an unlawful assembly?
I don't recall him expressing any kind of reason for it.
We saw the videotape all together earlier this morning. Do you recall that videotape? Was it pretty much, it starts in the middle of Lauren Gage talking or making his declaration, I guess you would call it. But do you recall any other words or any other explanation that he gave for his conclusions?
Vague as to who made the conclusions.
I think you said
Lauren.
Yeah, I think you did say Sergeant Gage.
Sergeant Gage.
Sergeant Gage Travato. Right.
Did you hear? Yes, sorry. Did you hear in the videotape Sergeant Gage making his declaration at the very beginning of?
Yes.
Okay. Did he say anything before that to you guys that you heard regarding, he meaning Sergeant Gage, say anything that you heard regarding his reasoning or rationale for why it had suddenly become an unlawful assembly?
No, actually, I thought it was Lou Travato who came and told us originally that we needed to move on.
And do you recall Chief Travato telling you why he felt it was an unlawful assembly at that point?
No, he didn't really get into the specifics of it. Not to my recollection.
Okay. Can you indicate for me, please, briefly your education with regard to American history?
American history? Well, I'm Native American, and so my education to American history is that a lot of our laws of this country are based on the Iroquois Confederacy.
That's the Iroquois Nation of Native Americans?
Yes, they're in the northeast part of this country.
Okay. And do you have any affiliations with any of the Shoshones?
Objection, Your Honor. Her ethnic background and Indian heritage is irrelevant.
Just answer yes or no.
What was the question?
Do you have any affiliation with any Shoshone groups?
I do.
And what is that?
Objection. Her ethnic background is irrelevant.
Is this going to be quick?
I hope. That's my intention.
Well, I have been working with a Western Shoshone Native, a spiritual healer, an elder, and it has to do with anti-nuclear movements.
Okay. And have you yourself taken part in other political activities.
Yes.
And what other ways have you expressed your political views besides the sitting down in the intersection on March 20th?
Well, like many others who've testified, I have written letters. I called my representatives. I've joined other particular groups, the Peace Center. I've been involved in some of the meetings at the Peace Center. I do peace camp in the summer with kids. I work in the schools, sometimes with conflict resolution.
And what was different about March 20th? Well, I guess I should ask first of all, have you ever gotten yourself arrested in the past?
Yes.
Okay. With regard to political behavior or something else?
No.
It wasn't involved. Okay. With regard to your political behavior, ma'am, I should ask these questions ahead of time, huh? With regard to your political behavior, what was different about March 20th that led you to sit down in the middle of the intersection? Did you intend to commit a crime or not?
No, I did not intend to commit a crime. Because of my work with my spiritual leader, a word that predicates his work is Shundahai. That's a Western Shoshone word for peace and harmony with all creation, and I've been following that for several years now. And I was moved to sit in the street because I was following my elders, people that I respect, and I've never really been politically active before this year in that way. So the letter writings and all the things you discussed a moment ago really have taken place fairly recently, is that right? Yes. In your discussions then, did the subject matter of the fact that maybe hundreds or thousands of people would join with you folks ever come up? In our discussions at the Affinity Group? At the Affinity Group? Well, that was the reason I sat down in the street personally, was because I was joining with millions of other people around the world who were doing the very same thing. And I thought that I never believed before that could make a change, but I did believe at that time that it would make a difference. And is that based on the learning that had taken place in your political life in the preceding year? Yes. In other words, talking to people that had been there and done that in the past? Yes. During the discussions of the Affinity Group that you attended, did you attend 6 to 10 or some other number? I would say yes, that many. That would be a fair number. Did the topic of violence ever come up? Yes. Was it the plan of the group to facilitate violence or to reject violence? Not at all. The topic came up in regard to nonviolence, actually. We were concerned that because there might be emotional outpouring that day, because people were really, many different emotions would be running rampant that day. We were concerned that other people besides our group might become violent because we had been having nonviolent trainings. And so we actually printed up a little sheet that said, if it was about civil disobedience and not being nonviolent, and we even spoke at the rally if people were going to be if they could not be nonviolent, please not join in our rally. Okay, and you and I talked a little earlier about this, but I wanted to, and some other people have talked about it, but I just want to ask you a couple questions. With regard to the rally or the meeting place at Pioneer Park, how large a crowd were you guys hoping for? We had no idea. We thought we might be the only people there. Okay. We have no idea. And in fact, as the officers have also testified, it came as a surprise to them, so I assume you agree it came as a surprise to you. It was shocking, the numbers of people. So the handouts that you were talking about, did that occur at the park? Yes. Okay. So from the get-go, then that was a concern of the marchers as a group, was to be nonviolent and try to be non-invasive. Is that right? Yes. However, it is my understanding that you wanted to draw attention to yourselves that day. Is that right? Yes. That's kind of the whole point, isn't it? Yes. So what was the purpose, as best as you can state it, simply stated, for the 12 or 15 of y'all to sit on the refrigerator box? Well, I think as a group, but I can only really speak for myself.
Please do.
My purpose was, I've been a member of this community for almost 20 years, and I work a lot in the schools, and I really wanted to stand up and be counted for what I believed in. And I wanted people to see me. I wanted to be very visible. I felt like I've been working behind the scenes in a lot of different areas for a lot of years, and I wanted to be counted with all the other people all over the world who are doing the same thing.
Thank you, ma'am. I have nothing further.
Ms. Kaufman, let's start with you.
I have no questions.
Mr. Birch?
You were concerned that the United States was going to engage in a preemptive strike.
Yes, we did.
Did you have a feeling as to whether one nation engaging in a preemptive strike on another nation was legal or not?
Objection, Your Honor. Constantly
It just asked.
Just yes or no.
Would you ask that again?
Yes. Did you have a feeling or an opinion as you planned your protest as to whether a preemptive strike, one nation against another, was legal or not?
Yes.
What was your opinion?
Objection, Your Honor.
We're not
I'll let her respond. This is within the context of what we were talking about. Okay. Go ahead and answer.
I believe it's illegal.
Okay, that's all I have.
Okay. Mr. Telephone?
No question.
Okay. Ms. Whale?
In what context is your understanding that this preemptive strike be illegal?
Objection. We have already asked and answered that question as to, that was her motivation, and that's it. She thought it was illegal, and that's it.
Well, this is where the confusion is about what we talked about in chambers. This is the kind of thing I told them I would allow them to talk about, as opposed to other types of things which we discussed. I will permit her to answer the question. You remember the question now?
Could I have her ask it to you again?
She wants to know why you believe it was a legal preemptive strike.
Well, because according to our Constitution, only our government, our Congress can declare war, and in addition to that, we can only, according to our Constitution, go against someone else in an armed conflict if they're threatening us in
Did you overhear me addressing the core group as to whether that people were invited to join me in stepping away and not being arrested so that we could go join the Veterans for Peace the following day?
Yes.
Did you hear me addressing the large group as it was coming down and invite them to continue on following the bagpiper to Pioneer Park?
Yes.
Anything else? Mr. Bond?
Thank you, Your Honor. Ms. McNair, when abouts did you join that group in the middle, in the intersection? Was it in the beginning or in the middle? Did you start from the very beginning when the initial people sat down?
Yes.
So there's no question you were there until the time that you were taken into custody, right?
Yes.
So that's about 2.5 hours. Is that correct?
Yes.
Now, you said that earlier testimony was you had this refrigerator box clearly marked with all kinds of signs to be visible, so you don't get hit by cars, right? Now, you've lived in this county for how many years?
About 18 years.
So you know about Nevada City, is that correct?
Yes.
And you know the traffic is Broad Street, Pine Street's pretty busy intersection. Would you agree?
I would say generally speaking.
So your plan is already anticipating that there will be traffic going in and around your group if necessary. Is that correct?
Yes.
Now, you heard the Chief of Police, Lou Travato, give his announcements to the group. Is that correct?
Yes.
And you also heard Sergeant Gage give his order to disperse, right?
Yes.
And it is your belief that after hearing that, you chose not to disperse but to stay there as an expression of your beliefs. Is that correct?
Yes.
And therefore you are, you knew that there will be consequences because that was already given to you by the sheriff, right? Because he told you going to be.
I'll object. Whether or not there were consequences is irrelevant. And The only other meaning of that is the legal conclusion that we're here today to decide.
They were warned that they were going to be arrested.
Okay, well, but you should have phrased it that way.
Okay.
Use
You were
the
warned that you were
consequence.
going to be arrested. You should not disperse, right? You heard that.
Yes.
And you chose to act and be arrested, right?
I chose to continue to sit in the street.
Okay, thank you. Nothing further, Mr. McNair.
Okay. Any further questions of her?
Thanks for
Who
the
was on
opportunity.
direct examination with her? That was Mr. Walker.
Thanks for the opportunity. No, thank you.
Okay, you may step down. Let's see, Mr. Virtue,